Episode 18 opens following Cordovan as she walks into her office and throws her scroll onto her desk. Looking out her window, she surveys the city and the smoke rising from it. She scowls as an aide announces themselves for a situation report. She allows them in and they give a rundown of the aftermath of the fight last episode. The breach in the wall has been temporarily sealed, though long-term solutions would require more time to implement. Of the 23 huntsmen who reported to the breach, only 11 survived, and of that, only 4 without injury. Reports are still coming in about total civilian casualties, but early observations note that it could have been significantly worse had breach procedures not been properly implemented. Citywide damages, Cordovan cuts off the aide and says, "Argus can deal with its own finances. I care about relevant information. What's the status of the base?" The aide is surprised, but acquiesces by scrolling through her report. "Well, the base was completely untouched. We expended 48 rounds of ammunition from anti-air batteries to kill 3 rogue manticores. As of this morning, we are officially down to 25% base personnel, with another 5% expected to leave in the next shipment. 45% of the heavy equipment and 85% of the light equipment have been transferred out. We have been seeing a drain in power across the board, though the engineers are attributing that to the ocean walls, which are due for maintenance. But as per your approval, the maintenance equipment was already sent back to Atlas in the last rotation." Cordovan looks to the aide and asks, "Anything to be concerned about?" The aide shakes their head. The engineers say the numbers are still within specification. Cordovan nods. "Then continued maintenance will become an Argus issue. Forward the report to Argus City Hall. It'll be on them soon enough." Cordovan pauses before asking, "And as for my request?" The aide nods to Cordovan's desk. "It's already been sent to your scroll, ma'am." Cordovan sits at her desk and dismisses the aide, scrolling through the information on her terminal. She only lasts a few seconds before frowning and getting Dee and Dudley on the line, asking, "Where are Miss Rose and her team?" Dee replies crisply, "In the infirmary, ma'am." Cordovan nods, eyes narrowing with thinly veiled anger. "I would like to arrange a meeting with Miss Rose and her team. In fact, I simply insist." We cut to the flickering vision of Adam as he's dragged through the boot, barely conscious. He tries to lift his head, which takes some effort, and he starts to curse the 2 Atlesian soldiers carrying him. As he succeeds in lifting his head, we're suddenly following young Adam with his head freshly bandaged. This is presumably after the incident where he got his scar, and we find him mid-yell towards his mother and his landlord. "How could you, Mom? He's made our life nothing but miserable! Why would you ever—" Adam is cut off as his mother yells, her voice broken. "He's your father!" Adam's one good eye widens, and we begin to hear a ringing as the rest of the scene goes silent. We see his mother's mouth move, but hear none of her words. The same goes for the landlord. He says something to Adam's mother, and steps forward with a look of aversion, towering over the shorter Adam. He begins to say something, but Adam blinks and reaches for a knife on the table. He lunges forward, but his landlord dodges out of the way, the knife piercing a weak aura and digging into the man's thigh. In the present, adult Adam struggles against his escort, shoving one into a wall and trying to do the same to the other. We intersplice one of the guards and his landlord punching Adam in the stomach, sending him reeling before he is properly restrained in the present. In the flashback, Adam rolls to a stop and looks between his mother and his landlord before darting out of the room in a panic. In the present, Adam is tossed into a jail cell where he's left in a heap on the floor. Exhausted, out of aura, and mentally broken, he silently curls in on himself as the camera fades to black. We fade in on Team RWBY being led into Cordovan's office by Dee and Dudley, and once they're inside, Cordovan says, "Dee, please get the door." He gives a curt, "Ma'am," and obliges, leaving Cordovan alone with the girls. The girls are banged up, but seemingly happy now that Adam is behind bars. Cordovan looks at them from behind steepled fingers, and RWBY starts off by saying, "Thanks for bringing us to the infirmary. Adam did a number on us." Cordovan gives a strong inhale and exhale before standing, looking out the window and folding her hands behind her back. She begins by saying, "Miss Rose, you are in possession of a functional scroll, are you not?" RWBY looks around confused. Yes?" Cordovan's back straightens. "In good condition? Speakers fully functional?" RWBY's brows furrow. Yes?" Cordovan's reflected face hardens. "What exactly were my orders?" Yang chimes in, "That we were needed to go to the wall, right?" The minute Yang stops speaking, Cordovan cuts in sharply. "I am asking Miss Rose." RWBY begins to shrink in on herself. Head to the wall. Ma'am." Cordovan finally turns to look at Team RWBY. Then explain to me why, upon arriving at said wall, you and your team immediately turned tail and fled, leading a known terrorist and a pack of uncontained Grimm through a populated city center while presumably competing to wreak the most collateral damage the city has seen in decades. Punctuating her words, Cordovan pulls up a series of videos from around the city showing Team RWBY doing basically what she said. RWBY flounders and says, But, Cordovan talks over her. But nothing, Miss Rose. You were needed at that wall. Your job was to hold that wall, and at the first sign of danger, you ran. Blake jumps to RWBY's defense. That's completely devoid of context. Cordovan doesn't even spare Blake a glance, growling at RWBY. Keep your pets under control. Yang jumps forward, eyes flickering red. Excuse me? RWBY, her face stony, puts out a hand to tell them both to stand down. Shakily, RWBY says, When we arrived, Adam was slaughtering the huntsmen that were already there. Some of us have dealt with him before, and we knew the only way to deal with him was to get him as far away from the breach as possible. Cordovan looks down her nose at RWBY. Abandoning your post in the process. Exceedingly convenient. Here's what I think. I misjudged you. You are students, and I've given you far more credence than you deserve. Today, you demonstrated abject cowardice. You saw your brothers and sisters lying in their own blood, and it proved too much for you. Had I the power, I would strip you of your provisional license and recommend a lifetime ban from the guild. RWBY shouts back, We're not cowards! We've been fighting for so long! Cordovan cuts her off, slamming her hands on the desk. Have you? How am I to know? You've offered me nothing but a fanciful story that I was wrong to entertain. You never fought at Beacon, and if you did, you'd still be there. You haven't fought at Haven, or else you'd be helping them rebuild. No, Miss Rose, I think you've been fleeing, and concocted for yourself an excuse to escape beneath the safety of Atlas's bosom. Unfortunately for you, Atlas is protected by the brave, and such craven behavior is unwelcome. RWBY stares in shock. What do you... Cordovan affords her no time to speak. Your intelligence matches your courage. The deal is off. I want you off my base, out of my sight, and out of my mind. You have disappointed me, Miss Rose. The four girls stare with a mixture of shock, horror, and rage. Weiss steps up. But the relic! Cordovan snarls back. As far as I'm concerned, your trinket is forfeit. RWBY yells. That's not fair! That wasn't part of the deal! Cordovan returns her eyes to the windows. Life isn't fair, Miss Rose. Get out! Dee and Dudley step into the room behind Team RWBY and begin to physically guide them out. RWBY tears her arm away and leads her team out the door, glaring at Cordovan until she's through the doorway. We get one last shot of Cordovan staring out at the city before we cut away. A special thanks goes out to all of my wonderful patrons for supporting the channel. If you like this content and want more of it, please consider supporting it. Also consider picking up my new action-adventure novel, The Artificer, which is now available for purchase on Amazon in digital and in print. With that all said, back to your regularly scheduled fixing. We cut to outside the gate of the boot, where Crow is standing awkwardly, hands in his pockets. Team RWBY comes shuffling out of the entrance, and there's a moment's pause when RWBY sees Crow waiting for them. He says, I heard about the chase, came to make sure you... RWBY doesn't let him finish, lowering her head, stealing her face, and angrily walking past him without a word. Crow reaches after her limply, and he turns to the other three members, confused. Yang grabs her arm, Blake scratches her neck, and Weiss rubs her temple, the three girls clearly uncomfortable and awkward. We follow RWBY as she walks along the boardwalk of Argus's beach, quickly going nowhere before arbitrarily stomping and plopping herself down on the wall dividing the beach from the concrete. The camera shifts to show Crow approaching her while the rest of Team RWBY walk into the city from the bridge, taking the damaged Bumblebee with them. As Crow nears, we get a close-up of where RWBY is glaring, directly at the boot. Crow arrives behind her, saying, The girls told... RWBY cuts him off, hissing with a wavering voice. I don't want to hear anything from you. Just... leave me alone. Crow obliges for the most part and stays silent as RWBY continues to glare at the boot, before dropping her head to her hands and scratching at her hair. She growls openly in frustration before shouting, We had it! We had everything! It was right there! We only needed one thing to go right, and it did! It almost did! She slams her hand into the stone of the wall. And now we don't have Oz, we don't have a route to Atlas, we don't even have the stupid relic! Throwing her head back, Ruby screams at the sky. Why does everything suck? Breathing heavier, she begins to slink down into herself, saying with less and less gusto, why does everything I try suck? Crow sucks in a breath and throws his leg over the wall to sit beside her. He goes to speak, only for Ruby to again interrupt him. Don't say I told you so. Please. Crow shakes his head and replies, I wasn't going to say it. Someone had to make a call, Ruby, and you made one. Unfortunately, this one didn't pan out. Them's the breaks. He pauses and pulls out his flask, looking at his reflection in the metal. Don't think there's an easy way to learn that lesson. Cruel irony is, if you'd made a different call out there, there's nothing to say it wouldn't have turned out basically the same way. Ruby sulks. So I shouldn't have done anything? I'm supposed to lead them, and all I've been is a terrible leader this whole time. Crow rolls his eyes and says, No, kid. And he stops himself before continuing. Ruby, a terrible leader would have left the relic in the well. Thumbing the flask, he continues. A terrible leader would have let that blowhard get to her. A terrible leader would have just given up. Ruby looks over to him, eyes puffy. Crow continues. It's too easy to just run. He twists the flask to see Ruby's reflection in it. And it's harder to stay. But it's worth more. Crow takes one last good look at the flask, eyes hardening, before making a big show of unscrewing the cap and chucking it into the ocean. Ruby watched it drop into the water with shock, turning to look at her uncle. He watches it sink down below the waves with a bittersweet smile. Patting off his thighs, Crow rises to a stand. I think I'm through with rolling over. He looks to Ruby. What about you? Ruby looks up to him, confused, shocked, and contemplative. Finally, she looks out at the boot with a frown. I don't know what to do. Crow shrugs. Do what you do best. You've gotten us this far. Gotten me this far. That's more than I can say for myself. Ruby smiles softly at the self-deprecating reply before narrowing her eyes at the boot. We're going to get that relic, get to Atlas, and we're going to do it whether Cordovan likes it or not. Cut to black. End of episode.